terms of nature alone, how are human beings equal in value, right? Larry Siedentop, he comments, at the core of ancient thinking is the assumption of natural inequality. Hey, what's happening? We're about to do a movie review on the Book of Clarence. My name is JD, this is Frenzy, Valorous.
Yes, sir.
We're just going to give our general thoughts, what we like about the movie, our dislikes. Firstly, to start off, what I really appreciate about the movie is how it uses a common set of references, villains, heroes, and stories that are familiar to the Western imagination as a framework through which it tells a story. And so that's what I mostly appreciate about the movie.
I like its complexities. I like the kind of the diverse black culture in it. You got blacks from Europe, Africa, America, all living into one fictional Jerusalem. And I think my favorite comment on the film was a critic that called it Passion of the Christ and Meets Friday. It's both those elements.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some Friday elements that I didn't like, and then some Passion of the Christ elements that I didn't like. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not really a James Samuel fan. I didn't like his previous film. Yeah. And so my critique is gonna be a bit deep. Might get a bit better, but I am a qualified filmmaker, so.
Alright, so like I said, I appreciate the framework of the movie, the way it delivers its message. Another thing I really appreciate is the arc of the main character's story, where he gets reconciled to his brother and he also overcomes some of his character flaws. I like that because it resembles the true shape or the true story wherein we find ourselves. The cosmic restoration of the universe and the restoration of God to man. Let's get into the more philosophical side of things, the messages behind the movie that the movie is trying to convey. So in the movie, Clarence goes on a journey of disbelief in God to affirming the existence of God. However, what I don't appreciate is that the movie never quite defines what God is, So when he says he doesn't believe in God, we don't know what he doesn't believe in. And when he eventually believes in God, God could mean anything from the universe to man, to knowledge, and to what I think the storytellers are trying to convey, which is the black man in certain instances. But alright, for the sake of argument, let's say that whenever the movie mentions God, it's referring to the invisible creator God espoused by Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Right? If Clarence means God in this sense, then I would argue that he affirms a belief in God throughout the movie, despite his claims that God doesn't exist. And we see this when he accuses his brother of being dishonorable for abandoning their sick mother, when he shows dignity and love and respect towards slaves, and when he feels remorse, when he's guilt-stricken for deceiving the ignorant masses, claiming that he's the Messiah. His actions tell us that he has a belief in justice, equality, and honor. However, these concepts cannot be grounded in nature alone. These are virtues that transcend nature. Let's take equality, for example. In terms of nature alone, how are human beings equal in value, right? It is obvious to the entirety of Western philosophy that human beings are not equal in value. I think there's an historian, Larry Siedentop. Yeah, crazy surname. Larry Siedentop, he comments, at the core of ancient thinking is the assumption of natural inequality, right? And in fact, the very fabric of Asian civilization had slavery woven into it. And so, it's very presumptuous. Even Aristotle, the philosopher, he said that it's clear that human beings are slaves by nature and other human beings are free by nature. Asian philosophers are adamant that nature herself testifies that some humans are fitter, stronger, smarter, and even frankly better than other human beings. And so where do we get this idea that human beings, by virtue of being human, are equal in value, right? The answer does not lie in the observable, it lies in the unobservable. So the things we can't measure, love, goodness, beauty, and in the being that grounds these supernatural values, right? God. Frederick Douglass, a friend of Abraham Lincoln, and the famous abolisher of slavery in the 1700s, said this about the institution of slavery.
You know, I'm reading KB and he quotes a lot of Frederick Douglass, so
Yeah. Yeah, Frederick Douglass is big. It's big.
Yeah.
No, he's integral in the abolishment of slavery.
Very vocal.
Yeah. Forgive me if I butcher the quote, but it goes something like this: "There can no more be the enslavement of man, made in the image of God, than the enslavement of God Himself." Right? We are equal because we are made in the image of God. That is why our equality stems from the supernatural, right? We aren't just ascended apes. We are fallen angels at the end of the day. So the God story and the equality story stand or fall together. If we feel that human life is sacred and that everyone is worthy of dignity and respect, and no one deserves to be trampled on because they are poorer, smaller, or weaker, then we are standing on particularly biblical foundations. And so Clarence, he can know what's right and wrong, right? He can know what's right and wrong, and he can behave accordingly. But in a world without God, it is impossible to justify those realities of right and wrong, justice, equality, and honor. Okay. So one last thing that I would like to address is actually a common thread that runs throughout the movie, the dichotomy between faith and knowledge, which actually poses itself as a fundamental conflict. But in actuality, you can't separate faith and knowledge. Faith requires knowledge, and knowledge requires faith. Before you can have faith in something, you need to know what it is. And in order to know something, you need to have faith that you can know that the universe and the knowledge out there is accessible, that you can actually know what's true. And there's no way to prove that scientifically. You just have to believe, that you have this ability to know what's true. Despite the fallibility of humans, despite our faulty reasoning, you have to believe that I can actually access the truth. And that's not something we can prove for certain. That's something we have to have faith. So before we can know anything about the universe at all, we have to have faith that we can know somehow about the universe. And it's interesting the example that Clarence gives in the movie of a man that's in a fight and he believes he can win the fight, and another man in a fight who knows he can win the fight. And then he asks the audience, so who will win the fight? The guy who believes or the guy who knows he'll win the fight? Which I think is a bit nonsensical, and you'll see why. Because if you apply the same argument and you just replace some of the words. Let's say there was a guy that wanted to get from his home to a destination. The one guy believed he can get to his destination. The other guy knew he could get to his destination. Who will get to his destination? So the way Clarence uses the word know, it's like a certainty of the future, but none of us have that certainty. So what he's preaching is an impossible doctrine. It's something. He's actually basically saying that knowledge is this thing that we should strive for, but the thing that he's saying that we should strive for is actually something that we can't get, and that is the knowledge of future outcomes. That's the last grievance I have with the movie.
Alright, yeah, so with me, the movie sucked. 0 out of 10. Hated everything about it. There's no substance. Don't record.
Okay.
Alright, with my grievances on the film, I really saw the influence of the Hebrew Israelites, the 5%ers, and the Gospel of Thomas Holiness. And it's like really clear that, this movie is, it doesn't use faith as the driving point of it. It's actually, faith is more of a backdrop. In the words of Jay-Z and James Samuel himself, he did mention that Jesus is more of a background character who is essential to the lead character's journey. And so it doesn't paint Jesus as this Messiah who is kind of the core of all our existence and all creation comes from him. It doesn't paint him as that. And yeah, like I said earlier, I'm not a James Cameron fan. I didn't like The Holiday 4, but that's not to do with any biblical reasons. It's just like, I feel like a lot of modern day cinema has now become like a response to whitewashing, which is fair. I understand. We need representation, we need to be seen.
Yeah.
But in our attempt to defeat the enemy, we become the enemy, and I feel like that's kind of where we're at now. It's like he paints this portrait where the whole world is against black individuals. The Romans are these European guys who just have oppressive rule over Jerusalem and an oppressive force over Judea, and it's like that's not as accurate as it should be. That's not how it was back then. First of all, in the Middle East, it's black and brown skin. Olive skin tone people are people called what people refer to as ruddy or olive tone, and that is just a Middle Eastern complex that shades up to black. I do believe Africans did walk in Jerusalem, but I don't think everyone inherently was just an African person. And so that's another thing I didn't enjoy about it. I could have, but that I suspended because Jane Samuel's seen The Art of the Fall. I knew what I was getting into, and I know what he's going to do in his next film as well, which is the same. I get it. So yeah, because if you do read the Bible, you will know that black individuals have existed throughout the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Like I mentioned, our names are there. You're talking about the Ethiopians in Isaiah's prophecy, the Cushite woman that Moses marries, the sons of Noah, the North African from Cyrene who helped Jesus carry his cross. You're talking about the apostle that helped church planting in the book of Acts. John was referred to as the Niger or the nigger, Niger, not Nigger. You're talking about the Ethiopian eunuch that Philip's baptized. You know what I'm saying? You're talking about the lover of Solomon in the book of Songs of Solomon, who was somewhat ashamed of a dark skin, and Solomon reinforces his love to the son, saying, "No, don't be ashamed. That's what makes you beautiful. Your melanin makes you beautiful." And so a lot of what's happening in film culture, in terms of representation, is just a misunderstanding that black bodies have existed in the Gospels. The black bodies have been written in the hands of Christ just as much as Middle Eastern bodies or European bodies or Asian bodies or Indian bodies. Christ is very clear that he came for all nations, not just a specific nation. And so with the book of Clarence, I don't like the assumption that the gospel is only for black people, and the gospel is essentially the gospel of self and the knowledge of self, and that is the true gospel. I don't like that narrative. I didn't enjoy that very much. And so looking at the Gospel of Thomas, I actually did research. I'm going to read it out loud if you don't mind. I don't know if you read stuff on your channel. This is basically a lot of the teachings in the Gospel of Thomas. And in the Gospel of Thomas, a lot of the accounts are not Christ-centered. A lot of his teachings are not Christ-centered, but again, in Thomas's version of the Gospel, assuming this is Thomas the disciple, a lot of scholars don't know which Thomas exactly wrote the Gospel of Thomas, but it's believed it could have been the disciple Thomas or a different Thomas, because the word Thomas actually in Greek actually means twin, if I'm not mistaken. So we don't know which twin, we don't know what that twin's name was, but these are the accounts that were found. And Jesus is not really the essential figure in that account, in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. In the Gospel of Thomas, the death and crucifixion of Jesus is never mentioned. It's not even important. It's not even an important aspect in his theology or his accounts. Jesus does not bring salvation through his death, but rather in the Gospel of Thomas, the way to attain salvation is through following Jesus' teachings and trusting that these teachings will get you into heaven and bring you for some form of righteousness. And so the blood of Jesus is ignored, the body of Jesus is ignored, the resurrection is ignored, and the main focus is Jesus' teachings, and this is how we attain salvation and righteousness, which is not really a stance I take, and I don't really agree with that.
Yeah, it's working your way to heaven.
Working your way to heaven, and the Paul is very clear that we cannot work our way to heaven. We just cannot. And in the Gospel of Thomas, the first chapter of the Gospel of Thomas, it reads, whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. And this is from Jesus' words. This is from the book of Thomas itself. It says, in the teachings of Thomas, us humans don't belong to that material world today. Our true home and nature is in the spirit world of wholeness, right? We don't belong in this material earth. And we attain salvation by getting true knowledge of the gnosis of essential self or reality, and his main focus is trying to dissect these words to attain salvation. I think it really does drive away from the actual purpose of these words. Rather, we have now put our faith in the words rather than the speaker of the words, which is Jesus. And and so much very distracting. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, he, the Gospel of Thomas, a lot of it points from wisdom and knowledge being God, and not characteristics of God or from God or things that God gifts us, but these are essentially God. And this is what Clarence aims to achieve, this godlike status where he knows everything and he's wise in all his accounts. And that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches us in Proverbs 2 verse 5 that then you will understand what it means to fear the Lord, and you will gain knowledge of God. For the Lord grants wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And what Clarence does, or the book of Clarence does, is it just rearranges these words completely. It's like, no. Once you know stuff, that's when you become God, and that's when you know God. Once you attain knowledge, that's when you attain God. And it's like, that's not really true. That's all the Bible teaches, considering that this is a film that takes place within biblical times. I think we have the right to hold it accountable for its portrayal if it's taking place in biblical times. You know what I'm saying? You have a film like Ben-Hur that does the same thing, and Ben-Hur isn't essentially about faith, but it's just more of a political film, and it moderates the accounts of Jesus accurately. It doesn't focus on them primarily, but this one did in a way, and it distorted them, and that's one thing I didn't enjoy about it, like the distortion of it. I don't mind the reinterpretation or the retranslation of some of these things, but the distortion is where I'm discomforted, because I'm concerned about how people take this, and I'm concerned about how people will kind of like be drifting into a path that isn't really truthful.
And we're misled.
Considering that this film was for.
Well, there we go. That's that. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you guys for participating in our discussion. If you guys feel like you enjoyed it and you were blessed through this, please like, please subscribe, because there's definitely more underway. And so yeah, I really appreciated what you said about letting go, about losing ourselves, crucifying our flesh, and in order to get to God, in order to know God. Let's make that commitment, search for truth, and God will definitely meet us halfway. I do believe that. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time for sure. Cheers.
Peace.
Be blessed. Be blessed.
Please tell me it was recording.